I want to talk to you about Level Ground and how we've approached business, and I've actually done a lot of presentations to students over the years about how to land a job, how to line up your values with your consumer education practices and such like that, but I want to tell you a little bit about our approach as a business. We've been at it since 1997. This is my wife of 22 years, Lori, and our 4 kids. This year they are from kindergarten to grade 12. It's our first year that we don't have a kid at home all day in 16 years. So I have a bit of flexibility in my schedule. I can sleep until 6, go to bed at 11 or midnight. It's wonderful. Yeah. We started our business around the same time we started a family. And it was actually in the process of getting ready to adopt our first, because our 3 oldest were all born in Haiti, that we started looking at the global interactions of economy and relationships, colonial rule and such, and how products have moved around the world for centuries. And it was in the process of adopting that we really thought about starting a business that would respond to global inequity. How could we respond in a way that wasn't about boycotting, wasn't about trash talking, but something that would be a positive model or a better direction for how the world could work with an everyday product? And we decided to start out with coffee as a way to do it. But in the process, we realized that everything we were doing was about small-scale farming, understanding and championing the small-scale farm. And I'm talking about a person typically in a South American or an African country who's probably got a family of 6 to 9 kids, lives on 1 to 3 acres, and has none of the government safety nets that we consider essential services, from a road that works even when there's heavy rains and the bridge gets washed out, to your kids want an education, they get to go to school and there's supplies there, or when a family member's sick, there's actually medical facilities available for them. That's not part of their day-to-day. So their realities are very different than ours. But one thing I could identify with is that I love growing things and I love trying to feed my family off my own property. So out in Brentwood Bay where we live, we have 1.5 acres, and we're trying to model a chemical-free, totally organic approach to raising our own food. Depending on the month, we save about $500 to $1,000 on groceries. And that can be everything from apple juice to kale to eggs to a whole variety of other things, and that's what I want to point out. So the light's a little tough to see, but you know, when you visit any farm, you meet the dog first. That's Soda Pop. We do most of our pest control, because if you're planting, who's gardening this year, getting stuff going right now? Slugs are generally the worst enemy, right? They're in there under your remake cloth, they're into your greenhouse, they're like little loggers taking down your seedlings and your starts. Ducks are just amazing for that, and I've got runner ducks that not only lay an egg every day, just eating around the garden. Snails are their favorite food. And so you can deal with a whole lot of problems in the garden by just having the right animals present. We grow a lot of berries and a lot of fruit as well. My funniest looking chicken this year has been named Tina Turner. She's got the hairdo there. And each year as we hatch out a batch of chicks, and those grow up, the females do, to be our hens that produce for the year, we raise the roosters up to the age where the hens are laying, and the roosters then become our meat for the winter. So my kids help me butcher about 50 roosters each fall. And we've only chosen in the last about 10 years to eat meat if it's meat that we can produce ourselves. I'm at that critical stage, checking temperatures and humidities. I'm 2 days away from hatching 300 eggs. And so I'm just about to have hatch. Monday is supposed to be the hatch day. My kids' classes come on field trips to see all the baby chicks. And this morning as I was checking the incubation process, I could hear the very first chirps about 9 a.m. this morning coming out of the incubator. So that's always a neat phase in our year. This is how we rototill our gardens. We have 5 pigs that have spent the winter with us, and they get put in a garden spot, and then all the grass clippings and all the weeds, a lot of barley from local brewers, and they just beautify the soil and make it gorgeous so that when they leave, it's ready to plant, and everything grows perfectly when you've had pigs in there for a few months. The other thing that's been really a wonderful addition to our family in the last year and a half has been a milk cow named Yogi. She's a little breed called a Dexter, so she only is about half the size of a Holstein. So she eats about half as much and produces about half as much, and she's about half the work. And she cuts the grass for us and turns it into milk and a beautiful baby once a year. So she had Boo-Boo last spring under our trampoline in my kids' playground. They got to see a calf being born, which is always a really wild experience. And we've been able to milk her on a regular basis for a full year. She's about to have her next baby, so she's taken about 6 weeks off just to recover and just getting fatter each day and eating lots of grass. But I'd say my best experience in the last year has been getting into beekeeping. You've probably heard that there's lots of problems with the bee populations in North America, and if you look at how bees get moved around to pollinate monocrop orchards like almond groves in California, where virtually the whole bee population of the US is brought in for a 1-month pollination window so that all the diseases of all the bees can be shared with each other, into areas that are heavily sprayed with numerous chemicals. And then the headlines come out of the mystery of why bee populations are at risk. And my experience as a rookie, I'm just a year or so into it and have 3 hives, is that the bees are the most wonderfully exacting barometer of organic and biodiverse versus monocrop and chemical-driven agriculture. And as soon as we have farmers who work on producing the most rather than getting the healthiest soil, we've completely missed the mark. And I have neighbors all around me who spray Roundup the second things start growing, who put chemicals out everywhere, and it ends up in local groceries and local markets. Currently in the food industry, local outsells every other motivator. And I want to let you know that there's no local farmer that I see around my place who farms in a way that would allow me, under my current importing guidelines, to buy their product. They're growing chemical-drenched trash. And if one of my bees wanders into their territory or even someone's front yard where they're spraying for dandelions, my bees die. Because what bees are is the most amazing and cute little GPS system in the world. When a bee returns to the landing board of the hive and her feet are covered in pollen and her belly's full of nectar, the other bees about to leave take note. They watch who's done best at foraging, and they follow the most successful foragers back in the hive to a dance floor. I'm not making this up. It's in every hive. And the successful foragers go into a figure-8 style dance, and it shows the outgoing foragers the distance to travel and the relation in connection to where the sun is at the moment. And the bees watching the dance download the distance and the direction they will fly to get the same great haul of food for the hive that she just got. And the first thing that stops in a bee when they're exposed to chemicals is their ability to navigate. They either can't find where they're going, or they don't find their way back. And we call that colony collapse. And it's not a mystery. It's everyday agricultural practices that end up on the grocery store aisles. It's a shame. And when you see the wonder of what's going on in a hive and how exacting and beautiful and delicate it is, it's a perfect barometer and indicator of how well we're doing. And it's been really interesting to get inside that and just watch what's going on and learn from it. It's breathtaking to see how much order and structure and thoughtfulness there is in a hive, and how quickly a person just wanting to get rid of dandelions in their garden destroys all the possibilities. I've got dandelions coming up in March. I've got blackberries on the fence line flowering till October. So you've got 8 months of nectar flow for a bee. But current agriculture says, buy the biggest piece of land you can, grow the one crop that grows the most abundantly and gets you the most cash in your pocket. It will flower probably for 1 week to 2 weeks. That will be the pollination window for the bee then. That's a desert. What animal lives off of 1 week of good feeding in a year from one food source? It's death to them. And yet they're directly responsible for 50% of the food that we get on our table. It has to be pollinated by bees. This is such basic stuff that I've learned in my first year of beekeeping, but without understanding it, I didn't really grasp how sensitive everything was around us. And as bee colonies collapse and people go, it's a mystery, I don't understand, and tractors drive around our neighborhoods spraying stuff that's toxic, we need to clue up, clue in, and understand what's going on. So when I get to visit farmers in small-scale little communities, there might be 50 of them, there might be 1,000 of them working to put together a skid of coconut oil or a container of coffee beans. I take photos like this on a little iPad, or my wife does, who just got back from India, and we tell stories and ask questions around our farming experiences. And it's on that basis of how do you build your compost? How are you addressing these weeds? How are you dealing with climate change? And that becomes a farmer-to-farmer conversation. We don't come in as business people asking how much, how many, what price. That's a very North American and not very widely accepted practice of conversation elsewhere that we go. How are your kids doing works a lot better. And so having that point of connection is key. And when people ask me why we started Level Ground Trading, I have a little sentence that I always share because it's really the heart of why we chose to adopt, and it's the heart of why we started our business. I believe that God deeply loves poor people. And so my whole life is positioned to respond to that belief. And people may or may not echo that belief, But I believe it's a great starting point because it responds in a positive way to needs that are out you, and I don't want to use charity as the main driving force behind what I do. I want a practical, sustainable way to respond to the needs around me. I love this saying, if wealth was the inevitable result of hard work, every woman in Africa would be a millionaire. That's another reason why we started our business. The world is not fair. That's why I end up parenting someone else's kids and dealing with the challenges that they encountered when they were malnourished or left on a street because their parent couldn't feed them. The world's not fair. And so we have to find ways to respond in the everyday. And when I started looking at it, even the most devout person who's into generosity and charitable giving might come up with 5 or 15% a year. The bulk of the world's problems have been caused by business, and I believe that the solutions have to come about in the same way. And it's got to be the ways in which we get our groceries and our clothes and our mortgages that we have to find ways to respond to what's going wrong if we're going to use the same power with which we've made it wrong. The other challenge I find in global trade as things become more and more global is that this is about as personal as trade looks. This is just last spring in Seattle's harbor. When product moves like that into the back of a furniture store, a toy store, or a grocery store, it's pretty hard to drill down to where an actual person in a family, in a community, is working away in a factory, a field, or a farm and know really what the impact of trade and business has on that person in that community context. If you're in our presentation room where I talk to people all the time about our business practices, all of our packages, images are up on the wall, and you can see in a blown-up scale, we have the GPS coordinates of the center point of each community we buy products from. So that people on their own can just take that package of Ethiopian coffee or dried mango on a backpacking trip and go to Colombia or wherever they are and find a producer center that we buy from and do their own due diligence if they wish, but they can actually find the real people who are actually producing the product that Level Ground Trading sells. And you know, there's a wonderful, empowering outcome when people actually connect consumer to producer and see those people there. It really takes away from that sense of awe and generality that doesn't let you know where anything's coming from and how it got there. This is our mission. I don't know if the text is too small, but it's to trade fairly and directly with small-scale producers in developing countries. That's a family-run farm that lives on the farm that's always under 10 acres, typically less than 5. Most of them are 2 or 3 acres. Those are ripe coffee cherries if you haven't seen them before. I always ask kids to guess, and they usually think they're cherries or grapes. But that's ripe coffee. And our underlying vision to that mission is to alleviate poverty. We want to do it on the terms of the producer group. So we go in and continue always on the basis of dialogues number 1. Just an open, transparent dialogue. So when I put down a full down payment of 100% cash advance for $20,000 of coconut oil last year, my first order from the central part of the Philippines where I've lived in the past, and the producer group having all my money because I needed it for cash flow to pay the small-scale farmers that were amassing all the coconut meat to dry and cold expel or press it, they went through both the biggest earthquake they'd ever had in their history and 6 weeks later, the biggest typhoon ever happening in the world. And I was over 11 months from paying in full till receiving anything I could sell. And the sense they had was that they had shortchanged me, ripped me off, taken my money and run, and there was an underlying sense of shame in any attempt at dialogue that I was trying to strike up with this new producer partnership. And it took about 6 or 7 months to surmount the fact that all they needed to understand is all I wanted was a transparent exchange of information. And it could all be in their mind bad news, as they thought I would interpret it, and that was great, because they were just telling me what was happening. And to get past that was huge. But now that we have, you should see the way in which that partnership evolves as they complete products and fulfill delivery promises on time, time and time again, because they know that we're there for the long haul. In 17 years, we've never stopped a trading relationship we started. It takes us usually 3 years from first meeting to a product on the shelf. We can't grow quickly. We can't amass piles of product in warehouses and open the floodgates to big chains. Oh, you can send us 10 kilos or 1 skid of this. We'll start with that. We'll grow from there. How can we partner on your terms? What does alleviating poverty look like? So if getting pencils in the school or clean water in your community or malaria treatment available is what you need, how do we fund that? Not with charity or donation, but with the everyday purchase of products we make from your community. Let's build it in. In places like Tanzania, where we've been trading now for 8 years, that's seeing over 2,000 families have access anytime they want at no cost to them for any and all health and prescription needs they need in a local nonprofit-run health center that they can all ride a bike to within an hour. It's amazing. And there's no donation, no one's sponsoring a child. People just have to drink our Tanzanian coffee and that happens. And I love that type of business model. Most people do. And it's a very different way of doing business than most businesses that say they're doing fair trade. So when we talk about business, we basically boil it down to three basics. First of all, we always focus on farmers, championing the person who usually does not have a voice and helping them find a market. So we're looking for marginalized farmers. If they've got everything lined up and they've got buyers for their product, we're not going to try to outbid someone to get the market for their product. They're doing fine. We want to find farmers who are struggling, having a difficult time finding access to markets, and we tend to now be in the shadow of refugee camps. We're working with farmers that are usually in the shadow of gun-toting ideologies who are trying to overthrow the local government. People who are struggling, who are displaced, who are refugees in their own regions. Places where it's too tough for an organic certified auditor to get in, but we buy their stuff because we know they're too poor to afford chemicals, and we take it on trust and do our own lab tests. Places like that in southern Colombia, in the DR Congo, in Haiti, it's a wonderful, life-giving place to go and have relationships. No one's mad at a farmer. They're caught in the crosshairs. And when the farmer leaves, the community doesn't eat. So if we find ways to stabilize the community by paying farmers well, they have options as a community. It's wonderful. But we also know people won't buy a product on ethics. It's got to taste good if it's a food product. It's got to be the best dried mango, the most wonderful cup of chai tea, the most flavorful dried vanilla bean, the best coconut oil I've ever baked with, whatever it is as a product. And so we try to lead on quality, and when people are loving our product, then we try to see if we can find an opportunity to tell them how people's lives are being affected. Like the guy who oversees quality in our facility is teaching workshops in Seattle this week at North America's annual biggest coffee show. He's our quality overseer, and he's also the head judge for the Canadian Barista Championships. But he's the guy that makes sure the temperature settings on our roasters and the quality of our beans and all of our processes are in place so that when it's a 100-score evaluation done by independent reviewers, our espresso gets better than 90 points. We like having that type of quality that speaks for itself. And then I think justifiably so, a lot of people out there go, "You're really fair trade? You really pay farmers more? How would I believe that?" So what we try to do is put out answers to questions that most people don't usually even have the gumption to ask because they can't even believe we divulge this much information. And by doing so, we hope that we can eradicate, at least in a buying relationship with level ground trading, the sense of belief and trust that we've developed in our partnerships with producers in small countries. So this is what our t-shirts say that we're wearing most days now. 10 countries and 5,000 farmers spread across them. We started out in South America with coffees from Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. We then started getting coffee from Tanzania in 2006 and Ethiopia in 2007. Now for 3 years, we've got coffee from DR Congo and vanilla beans from Uganda. We get our black teas from Assam in the north of India. The spices that go into the chai are from Sri Lanka. And then we get coconut oil and now heirloom rices from an indigenous group in the north of the Philippines as well. I get to go there next month. The text is really small. I don't assume that you can adjust your bifocals enough to read that, so I will for you. At least once in your life, you might need a doctor, a lawyer, an architect. But every day, 3 times a day, you need a farmer. They're the most important people on the planet. They're right there with the bees. And so if we can champion the small-scale farmer who's stewarding the land and caring for the water table and keeping the soil well and feeding and caring for their family and raising them in that community, allowing food to be accessed locally, we're doing the best possible thing we can for the planet. That's the way that we're trying to champion and focus on farmers. This is an example right off our website, a screenshot of what I mean by transparency. You can go onto our website at any time under About. You can see it's About Direct Transparency. You can click on any origin of coffee that we buy from our whole 17-year history. If you hover over this with your mouse, it says currently roasting our 25th order of Bolivian. That's a container of 40,000 beans, 40,000 pounds rather. Tells you the date on which we finalized that transaction contract, the volume of the order, what the World New York Commodity Stock Exchange price was in US currency for a pound of green coffee at the time, what we chose to pay the farming community, an additional premium to address the specific poverty issues they want to have addressed, the total price in US currency, and of that, the percentage that trickled down. We offer a pie chart as well on every product so people can see it simply. And we try to provide any questions. So if people phone us or email us and say, I don't understand this, we break it down even further if they want it broken down further. Full display of where all the money went when we bought a product. What we've realized is we can pay 25 to 50% above what the market's paying typically, sometimes more. It's still viable for us as a business model, and ultimately it accomplishes our mission in producer communities. So in Ethiopia, and as an example, we have it broken down where the cash payment goes, and in each case we're visiting the co-op or the producer group on an annual basis and connecting with them, and we actually look at individual farmers' pay stubs of what they sold to the cooperative they're a member of, so we know exactly how much money got into their hands. We don't just take it from a person over a phone or in an email. And that way we can drill down and really verify that's actually happening. This is a farmer outside his home in DR Congo, pulping coffee, the green beans getting hand sorted. Imagine that as a job 8 hours a day. Just sorting through beans. Anything that's bug damaged, chipped by the mill, discolored, it's going to make the cup taste less good. You won't want to buy the coffee if she doesn't work at it. When she gets paid well, and this is the crazy thing, the typical mill managing coffee in DR Congo pays $1 a day in an insecure environment. Providing lunch and $2 a day doubles their revenue and gives them a caloric boost that they never had before. It's totally viable to double their wages and make it a very good wage in their community. But someone had to go in who we partner with, and in 3 different places in DR Congo, he had to put out $50,000 US to build a mill about 4 times as big as this room, secure, where farmers could bring in and be paid cash for their coffee. Otherwise, it goes illegally in banana boats overnight across Lake Victoria to Uganda and gets sold the next day as Ugandan coffee. And no people get jobs milling. And then you've got to be able to run trucks in and out. He had to put hundreds of thousands of dollars out just to set up a station to buy coffee from local farmers, to pay them in their currency and create jobs. He had all that in place, or getting set in place, said, who's going to buy coffee from me? We're like, we will. We'll partner with you. And until we were able to give him $250,000 in orders, he couldn't start his business model. But out of that partnership, hundreds of people get work. It changes the complexion of what's going on in the community. And we're able to visit. Staff go into DR Congo, into a refugee war zone to see what's going on and to verify what's taking place there. So our brand lineup includes coffees across the top, cane sugar on the left, a line of dried tropical fruits, coconut oil, tea, and a few other things that aren't pictured there. We've got all of them for sale outside, lower than grocery store prices today, and 25% of everything goes back to Creatively United for the Planet. So it's actually, we're losing money on every package sold just to get it into people's hands. The tea is from Assam, India, as I mentioned, in the north. It's the state of the country that has the lowest minimum wage, the highest rate of cancer because of the common sprays that are used in the tea industry. And to find a garden that will grow tea organically usually is a hard search. 5 years ago, it was almost an impossible search. And it requires a lot of education and a lot of partnering to help gardens get that way. This is my wife, Lori, meeting Goban, one of the guys we've been trading with for over 3 years. If you drink our chai today that we're serving, he did all the black tea with his staff to create the tea that goes into our chai. My wife, on a visit to India, whenever she goes, has to cover 1,000 kilometers of roads to meet 9 gardens and talk to about 200 people. That's where our teas are coming from. It isn't a group of neighbors in an idyllic little setting. They're flanked on all sides by massive plantation estates that are thousands of acres that spray every day, and they're a little organic garden on 1 or 2 acres, trying to do things differently, usually on land that their parents had before them. Sitting in a circle with a translator, with the people working to discuss what alleviating poverty in their setting looks like. And every conversation in every garden is a completely different discussion with completely different directives that we're left with. In typhoon season, our thatched roofs leak. Metal roofing is number 1. Our children's bellies are always sick because the water has bacteria in it. Water filters are what we needed. Things are spread out and we need a bicycle to share at the garden to get around. And 3 years running, every conversation, we've been able to respond together with the garden owner who they work for to see every request addressed, and it's built into the purchase of the tea we buy. This year we're setting up a facility that'll be Indian-owned, where all of the work done in India will get all the coffee, all the tea packaged as well, all the value added done there, so that more money gets back into people's pockets there. Pompey is the woman in purple here who's translating for my wife Lori, and after her first time on the road with my wife and having these conversations garden by garden with the workers, she actually sent my wife and I this email. This is back 2 years ago. What you did today was record breakable. She's saying this to my wife. No one from a company, and this is in a community where people are touching white skin because it's so foreign to them still, has ever sat down on the ground with workers and said that they're equals. And for us, that's what embodies our name, Level Ground Trading. They're horrified that someone white would come into their setting and sit down on the ground, on the dirt with them, and ask them how they're doing. And it's been really cool to chronicle the changes and the relationships developing over time as we get rolling. If you haven't seen tea in action before, it's just usually the top 2 leaves in a bud that are being picked. In spring, this is in February, March this year, the pruning had happened in fall, and as spring's coming, the little shoots just start going, getting ready to be plucked. Here's a comparative between the top and the bottom of a chemical-based plantation on the lower and an organic one that we buy from up above. On the lower one, if you could see a little more closely, there's no leaf matter and no debris on the floor underneath the tea. There's no weeds, there's no branches, there's nothing to cover. So when you get a typhoon or a torrential rain, everything runs off. But they're also spraying chemicals almost every day on the plants to address pests because they're monocropping. They're using chemicals all the time. The plants are highly stressed, so they're very susceptible to different pests. This is the typical picture in a typical conventional garden where sprays are being used all the time. Herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, constantly. The big thing my wife notes is you cross the border from an organic to an inorganic tea garden, and it goes from full of loud musical birds feeding on the pests that are resident in an organic garden to absolute dead silence. Nothing lives, no birds are there. Underneath the organic plants, there's a pile of debris and leaf matter. It all holds moisture in when the rain happens. The water doesn't run away, it stays put. For the garden that's not organic, they dig these huge ditches. And all the runoff, they hope, will take the chemical-laden water and push it away from where their perhaps dug-out water hole or well is, and away from where the children play, because they're increasingly aware this is toxic stuff. They're spraying every day to kill something, and then that becomes the groundwater they drink from. Kel is a guy who, with his wife Peggy, lives half the year on the island. He started working every year 12 years ago, just teaching people how to grow organic veggies and produce in Assam, India. Just a life passion. He's helped us connect to tea gardens, and here he is working with some of the people, just checking the quality of the soil and the water retention. He and his wife have worked out on a basic small area of land for a farm. If you were organic versus not organic, where do the rupees fall, and how much money do you make or lose based on this practice versus that practice, so that you can build a case for even the finances alone, never mind the health and environmental reasons for why you'd grow organically. Tenzing's a fascinating guy. He's from the Bodo tribe, and Tenzing's a guy who's come back to work his parents' land. His father's passed away. He's still in his 20s. His day to become an organic farmer happened in a 5-minute snap of the fingers. Till the day that he became an organic farmer, he had done it like everyone else. One of his workers had a backpack sprayer on, had just diluted from the family drinking, cooking, irrigation pond into his backpack sprayer, but didn't screw the cap on tightly. And while Tenzing was doing one thing in the garden, his worker was off spraying, lost his balance a bit. The chemicals sloshed onto his back from the opened cap on the sprayer, and it started burning his flesh. So he went running over to the pond to get more water to rinse his back, and Tenzing came to help him, and they cleaned out his clothes and irrigated his back and got the burning to stop, and they turned around to the pond, and all the fish had floated belly up dead in seconds. In a concentrated dose, it killed everything living in the pond. And that was his first time really understanding how severe what he was using in a more dilute form every day was affecting everything alive around his property. There's different motivations for every garden. We want to understand what their reasons are. Some are counting the numbers. It's expensive to use chemicals. Others understand this is destroying the earth. But for whatever reason, we want to make mileage with that and promote that and pay for that organic grown tea. And then, as I mentioned, have them sign a declaration and lab test it to make sure that it is. So this is one of Tenzing's cowboys. He gets milk for the family now to feed them. And he has manure from it that he can make organic compost with so that his plants have healthy inputs that are nutritionally rich and there's no chemicals being used. A compost pile getting ready for the rainy season covered with banana leaves so that the nutrients stay preserved. That's exactly what I'm doing with my compost right now. So when you look at all that as an approach to business, what we're saying is that sustainability for us at Level Ground is about it's flowing from long-term relationships. Nothing can be more sustainably minded than the predictability and the constancy of someone who's there for you. When you've got climate change and fluctuating prices as a small-scale farmer, you're overwhelmed and your future is very uncertain. Try selling coffee into today's market. In the last 24 months, it's doubled and fallen in half and doubled again, the world price on coffee. You don't know what you're going to get paid if there's not some constancy provided by a buyer who will come in and say, this is how much we need, this is the quality, these are the dates we'd want it shipped, we've agreed on the price that you'll be paid. Things settle down a lot. People desperate in any setting make really poor environmental decisions. When you're in a hurry and you're not thoughtful, your environmental thoughtfulness will be much hampered over when you're deliberate and slow-paced and able to really pause and reflect on what's going on around you. Desperate people, rich or poor, make bad environmental choices. People who can be thoughtful and deliberate aren't nearly so. So we believe it's an entirely human approach that brings about sustainability for the planet. We do our part in predictable orders and consistent prices. This year we'll buy about $4 million of products from those 5,000 farmers in 10 countries. And that's money that we've promised before their harvest starts that they know is going to come if they can deliver the product. So we provide that letter of intent up front. The outcome of that, it's not about hugging a tree. It's hugging a farmer because it's on his or her land where that tree is that we want to see preserved. Trees get cut down when coffee farmers don't know the price of coffee because there's a price for everything. But if you can stabilize the soil with the extensive roots of that tree and provide migratory bird habitat with that tree standing, there's a lot of good things that happen. But you've got to hug the farmer to keep the tree standing. I mentioned our dried fruit. Really cool thing is that you take a kilo, it's a huge mango, a kilo fresh piece of mango, the same day that it's harvested from a small-scale garden, it ends up in an organic certified facility that now Colombians own 80% of. We only own 20% of the facility that we started 12 years ago in Colombia. That 1 kilo mango fresh ends up being 100 grams of dried mango being shipped to us. It goes from rotting in 2 weeks to shelf stable for 2 years. It's grown organically and dried with nothing added. The pit and the peel and the juice, which is consumed by the women who work on that facility, it all gets composted there. So we're not shipping a bunch of waste and water around the planet. We started it because we wanted to create long-term jobs for women who are in distress, who'd been displaced. About 10% of Colombia's population are refugees in their own country at any time. So they have about 3 million displaced persons at a time. We hire women who are single moms. They've lost their husbands, usually through a guerrilla group going through their community, killing people and displacing them. The women are pushed out and they flee to Bogota, the capital. They're desperate for work. They've got kids who are really quite traumatized by what's happened. And they're not skilled at working in a city. It's a bit overwhelming. But they now run an organic certified, HACCP certified facility. They can move several thousand pounds of fresh fruit every day. This year, they'll ship us 9 shipping containers of dried product. The package is made in Colombia. The UPC code that scans at the grocery store where you can buy it is done in Colombia. It's packed in cases of 12. They do all the work. So all the money stays in their pocket for producing that product. It's a really tasty visit if you get to go there when fresh stuff's being sliced. This is our staff. There's about 30 of us in total that work out of our facility, just on Keating on your way to Butterfly Gardens or Butchart Gardens out on the peninsula. And we hire to values alignments rather than skill sets. I kind of say to people, any monkey can learn Excel in a week, but how do you teach integrity? If a person's not grown up or built a lifestyle where they can be trustworthy, solution-oriented, respectful in their communication, passionate about things that are passionate to the company, it's probably not going to work out for any of us. But if we can hire to a values alignment, that person's going to find numerous opportunities to keep on being part of the business and basically reinventing themselves as they evolve. So these are the things we look for when we hire people. And I love sitting down with a new staff person because about a month in, I get to have lunch with them and just ask them about things and teach them more about our business. And I like to show them this list again and remind them of it and say, what most attracts you to being at Level Ground in this values? One of the people who recently came to us in the last year, she's actually learning how to be a high-end coffee cupper in Seattle today at an event. She roasts for us as well. She pointed to the third one. We work towards environmental sustainability. She said, that's why I left my last job. I was working as starting every shift at the beginning of a day in a local food processing facility. They've got a reputation for being quite green and thoughtful. We were throwing away so much stuff that could have been donated. We were landfilling so much product that could have been composted or recycled. She said, I would start my shift every day on the loading dock, and I found myself crying by 8 a.m. every day because it was so destructive inside to do what my job mandated me to do. And I heard that you guys haven't sent anything to Heartland for 7 or 8 years, and that's why I came here, because I felt I could be alive again. So once I knew what's the connection point for her, I know how I can really see her fulfilled in her role, because she's amazing at auditing waste and managing things like that I'm equally passionate about. This is Frank. He's on parental leave with a cute little son named Otis right now. Frank came in this week because a bunch of our staff are at the coffee show in Seattle. He's on parental leave. And the girls in the office hung out with his little guy while he did the shipping requirements for the last 2 days, even though he was on parental leave. But the other things that are awesome about Frank, because he's been with us more than 10 years, is that I had these shelves in our cupping lab, and all of our samples of incoming and outgoing green beans that we have to test were there. And they needed shelves, and I was given these raw pieces of wood to rip on my table saw at home, and I brought them in, and I didn't know who was going to paint them or install them, but I came to work the day after I'd ripped them on my table saw, and they looked good, and they were installed, and I could see there was color on them, and I presumed, this is in our cupping lab in an organic facility, someone used stain or paint. But I went up to it and sniffed it, and it smelled like a mix of chocolate and coffee. And I was like, what is that? And I went to Frank, and I said, Frank, do you know who put up the shelves? Yeah, I did. They smell really interesting. He says, yeah, I was thinking, our facility. And Frank used to be pretty upset about our environmental policies. That was a tough nut to crack. He says, I was thinking about our organic facility, and I decided the best thing to do was brew up a big batch of espresso and paint them with coffee. And that's what he did. No one told him to do it. He wasn't supervised. He just knew what to do. Something that you could never put in a rule book or a guideline. It isn't in our SOPs, paint all wood with espresso coffee. But his gut told him what to do. When you get that type of a staff person, you never let them go. They never leave. So just winding up, our facility's organic certified. We've been zero waste now since about 2007. We work on upcycling and green commuting, so I'll just explain a little bit of how that works. The green commuting is basically we let our staff log in at their workstations when they arrive each day, and they can hybridize how they commute to and from work. Maybe take the bus in, cycle home, carpool with someone, whatever you want to do. There's a way you get subsidized if you're not one person driving one vehicle. Just a little financial perk to getting to work creatively. Coffee sacks are our biggest output of waste. They're all organic, biodegradable. If you put them on the path in your garden, in 1 year on the West Coast, they turn to dirt. They're beautiful. If you're starting starts or seedlings in fall that are going to be your winter veggies like cabbages or things like that, and they have a tough time sprouting when it's 25 degrees C every day, and you put a damp coffee sack on them while they just get going, you don't have to water them. They just keep the ground moist. And they keep the worms at the surface, and they suppress the weeds. They're like magic in the garden. My neighbor grows about 2 acres of veggies. I have a much smaller garden, and the first day he saw me doing this when we moved in as newbies 4 years ago, he started laughing at me when he saw this. The next year he bought $2,000 off me. This is actually his sister, Joan, who runs her own garden, and it's just a great way to manage waste. Our other big waste is chaff that comes off our coffee. It gets mixed by refuse, who picks up all the stuff here today at the event, and refuse usually gets the food waste out of the back end of local restaurants and cafes. And they mix it with our coffee chaff, which suppresses odor and absorbs moisture, and then they sell the finished compost in our compostable coffee sacks. This is the only dumpster we have, cardboard. It's the only one. You know what's really wrong with the waste management industry? They don't weigh your dumpster. So if it's a landfill-bound dumpster, and it's full of orange peels that'll turn to dirt, they don't charge you less. And if it's full of styrofoam that'll never break down, they don't charge you more. So as a business owner, what got me thinking about this back about 12 years ago is that I saw my staff scrambling to the dumpster to fill it full while the truck came down towards our building. And the idea of value was the fuller the dumpster is destined to landfill, the better the value to the business owner. And I thought, that's just completely thoughtless. They should have scales and be inspecting what's in the dumpster before they tip it. But it's the same fee every time. So we got rid of all our dumpsters, except for the cardboard, put in 13 streams of recycling, declared ourselves landfill free, and told all of our staff that any waste streams that they can't recycle in the blue box at home, they can bring to work and we'll pay to have it picked up. Things like styrofoam and soft plastic, and we've been doing that for quite a while now. So those 8 extra streams we cover. That's how we manage our green commuting, so we can log in and see how everyone's doing on their commute. You can see about 35% of our commuting distance is offset by green commuting. Empty coffee packages. You need a coffee package that's got a multi-ply to keep coffee fresh. If you put it in a paper bag, it's stale in 2 days, no one will drink it. You can't ship it anywhere. You need something that's going to let CO2 come out and keep the coffee beans fresh inside. And if you needed to know it, feel free to leave if you have to, but I'll be done in less than 5 minutes, probably 3. But these packages that keep coffee fresh are pretty tough environmentally, and we're constantly looking for a better product to use. Some of our staff are working on that almost full time right now. But our stopgap solution is a job for a woman named Nahid, who came here from Iran. She was a professional seamstress, came here with refugee status with 4 kids. We bought her a commercial sewing machine. We rent an office for her at Victoria Community Microlending. She has a key to the building, come and goes when she wishes. And we take all these empty coffee packages that customers return to us through all the local stores that sell our coffee. They're kind enough at the customer service desk to leave an empty box to take our empties back. Our sales guy is passionate about nothing going to landfill, so he claims them every time he does a sales visit. Nahid gets a job out of it. We're selling those bags in the parking lot for $10, but if you buy $50 a product, the bag's free. So you can have a full bag and the bag's free. So that's been a really cool thing for her. That's what a finished tote is looking like from Nahid. I have 2 requests to those of you who are here today. Can you like us on Facebook if you're on Facebook? That'd be kind of you. Level Ground. And secondly, this email's a little tough to read, but in short, it's just, would you like to come on a tour to Level Ground, bring some friends or a group, or maybe you know of a school or a community group that would like a tour? I do scouts, kindergarten classes, university business classes, any group. Richard LeBlanc wrote this email to me. He runs Woodwind Farms out on the peninsula, and he was referencing Ian Bruce's comment from Peninsula Streams, just saying that he really enjoyed what he learned in coming to Level Ground on a tour, and we try to make it worth your while with a lot of good coffee and tea while you're there as well. So I'm glad to stick around and answer questions. I'll be in the parking lot all day. Dion's up next, and you just have to switch over to your presentation. So that's it for me. Thanks, guys.